Hi, welcome to the Junior League of Birmingham's Trafficking 101 presentation. I'm Jessie Hardy. I'm on the Anti-Human Trafficking Committee of the Junior League of Birmingham, and I'm here with Ellie Friedman virtually to present this Trafficking 101. Ellie, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Like Jessie said, my name is Ellie Friedman. I am a deputy district attorney here in the Birmingham division of Jefferson County, and I am on the Junior League of Birmingham's Anti-Human Trafficking Committee. Jessie is also an attorney. She practices family law. So we both deal with this professionally.
And just to catch you up, I'm a family law attorney in Birmingham. I've been doing it for about 10 years, and trafficking is important to me because I see it all the time, and it's an issue that's real. You might be asking, why is the Junior League in this space? The Junior League deems child sex trafficking as an issue that we need to tackle, and our committee is leading the charge. Our committee has worked with mayors across multiple municipalities to declare January Anti-Human Trafficking Human Trafficking Awareness Month. Our committee also works on an initiative to train law enforcement and other communities on trafficking awareness. We partner with several other nonprofits and agencies in the area in order to bring awareness to human trafficking and help combat that issue.
Before we start with our presentation, I do want to touch on a few things. The first is that while we're both attorneys, what we're saying is not legal advice. If there is something in here you want to know more about, or you have a legal issue, then it is advised that you consult with an attorney to do that. And this is just general information. And the second is that this topic is very sensitive in nature. We are going to be using some language that might be harsh. We're going to be talking about things that can be traumatizing. So just know that that is coming. It's hard to avoid it when talking about human sex trafficking. So if there are kids around, make sure you have some headphones, and just know that this could have some trigger language. And third is that we're going to talk about victims and usually refer to them as women, children, girls. While it is possible for men to be trafficked, and it does happen, the majority of our victims are women. So that's why we use that language just as like a general reference point, not because we don't think it doesn't happen to men. It does. This is just for ease of conversation.
Bear with us while we have a little technical difficulties. This is actually our slideshow. We hope everyone can see that presentation. The Junior League, we believe communities across the nation need to start having a proactive conversation about how to combat trafficking. Traffickers operate in networks, and they operate in networks that they are banking on the fact that we aren't working together. We don't know what they're doing, and if we're not communicating as agencies in partnership, then we can't really combat trafficking or become more aware of it. The solution is more of a community-wide response and a national response. We want Alabama to be a place that people come to enjoy college football, experience our notable food scene, and explore our green spaces, drink our craft beers, but not a place to come and buy sex or sell sex. Now we're going to show you a quick video to understand how domestic sex trafficking works.
Americans care a lot about money. We talk about jobs and taxes and paychecks, but here's what we don't talk about. Right here in the United States, there is a thriving underground economy based on selling children for sex. If sex sells, then business is good. Look at all the money. It was almost $1 billion in this study. But these dirty profits come at a huge cost. This is how sex traffickers do business. It's about supply and demand. First, they need someone to sell. Traffickers target children in their own homes. They find them by combing through social media profiles, looking to spark a conversation. The trafficker targets preteens and teens by finding an end, something to bond over and earn their trust. It could be the promise of a modeling career. They might buy them drugs or alcohol, or provide protection from an already dangerous situation at home. Traffickers gain psychological control and use violent threats to force victims to stay. Once the child is isolated from family and friends, the trafficker puts them up for sale. This is where the demand comes in. Traffickers use internet sites to connect with buyers or Johns, but calling them Johns is too polite. They are abusers. They are purchasing kids for sex. So who are these buyers? Court records show they've been teachers, pastors, cops, and judges. They could be the guy next door. The trafficker gets the money. The buyer gets sex. The child victim gets exploited and sold. So how is this different from prostitution, pornography, or other sexual acts? These victims are minors. Legally, they cannot consent. This isn't the movies. It's not like Pretty Woman or Taken. Richard Gere is not the buyer. Liam Neeson isn't there to save the day. This is sexual exploitation. This is trafficking. This is modern-day slavery. It's selling girls.
Okay, that video did a good job of explaining trafficking in general, but let's kind of talk about what is trafficking as far as the law. Trafficking is going to be a commercial sex act that involves force, fraud, or coercion for adults. What is force, right? Let's talk about that. Force is going to be what you typically think of. It can be violent. It can be a threat of force. Fraud can be the promise of a modeling gig or a certain job. And then coercion can be do this or I will send that nude picture out. Do this or I will tell your family that you are a prostitute. So a commercial sex act for force, fraud, or coercion. This is for adults. Alabama has the Safe Harbor Law, which passed in 2016. And it said that if you are under the age of 19, you cannot be prosecuted for being a child prostitute, which is an oxymoron. You cannot consent to have sex if you are a child. So in order to be a child, you don't need to have force, fraud, or coercion. You just need a commercial sex act and then under the age of 19.
Ellie's talked a lot about how the 2016 Safe Harbor Act has changed the perception that a minor could be actually convicted for prostitution, because a minor can't consent to commercial sex. Since 2016 passed the Safe Harbor Law. 2016 wasn't that long ago. That said, if you look at fraud, a lot of times we see fraud in the trafficking situation where a trafficker might offer to a victim that if they take this photo or they do this thing, they might have this modeling gig or that's a casting interview. A lot of times those are really deceptive practices that would lure a victim into that trafficking ring. Also coercion. Coercion is going to come up a lot of times with if you're in a relationship and a victim would send their trafficker, or perhaps before they're their trafficker, a boy that they like, a photo that's inappropriate. Coercion can be, if you sent me that photo, all of a sudden that trafficker now has power. And in order to keep that victim in that trafficker's stable, they might say, well, I'm going to send that nude photo to your pastor or to your teacher or to your guidance counselor. And that coercion is what keeps trafficking victims involved in trafficking. Okay, now that we've talked about what is trafficking and how it's different than prostitution, we're going to talk about the types of trafficking. Trafficking happens most often in one of 5 ways. You'll see on your screen, it's familial trafficking. That's probably the scary thing to hear tonight at this training. Familial trafficking is when someone in the family is selling the child for sex. That might be for rent money or drug money, or just how the family makes an income. As we continue to investigate Alabama's sex trafficking of minors, we believe this type of trafficking will be more predominant than otherwise expected. The Counter-Trafficking Data Collective estimates that family members are involved in one half of child trafficking cases. In fact, other research estimates that 85% of trafficking victims were sexually abused as children. So this is a pattern of behavior, and a lot of times it's a situation where the victim has no control over the family situation they're involved in. Other form of trafficking is survival sex. Survival sex is when you're trading sex for something you need, whether that's housing or clothing or food. This comes up a lot in the LGBTQ population, and sadly enough, our homeless teen population just right here in Birmingham, Alabama. Romeo pimp is another form of trafficking. This is what you're going to see a lot of as far as what's actually happening on a daily basis. The Romeo pimp's going to be a smooth talking guy. He's going to be somebody that the trafficking victim believes is her boyfriend. There's romance involved, and that cycle eventually begins where she becomes part of his trafficking stable. She starts to have commercial sex, and she might be doing that for her boyfriend so they can pay rent. She might be doing that just one time, and from there it evolves, and she's stuck in this pattern. 85% of survivors of trafficking say they have a good relationship with their trafficker. It makes it really, really difficult to investigate and elicit arrests on these victims as, or at least traffickers as crimes. You'll also see a guerrilla pimp. Guerrilla pimp is going to be the most violent and the most abusive trafficker there is. The guerrilla pimp is going to be somebody who beats their trafficking victim into submission so that they can gain control and continue that pattern of manipulation. Guerrilla pimps are often start out as Romeo pimps and then evolve into guerrilla pimps, or are violent in nature and they are Romeo to victim. Illicit massage parlors are also listed. Yes, this happens, but it's a whole other beast and not really something we're going to cover at all in this session. Okay.
Let's talk about the business of trafficking. Jessie, do you want to talk about key partners?
Yeah, so the key partners, remember how we talked about traffickers operating in hidden networks? And the whole benefit of holding this training and bringing community awareness is to try to elicit or eliminate those networks that they're operating in these hidden kind of environments. So key partners are going to be traffickers eliciting products, and those products are going to be what you see as young girls in that photo. They do this through social media, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, really any online app or online access that has a chat feature. Products, and what's different about trafficking and other crimes like the drug trade or the gun trade is that the products of a trafficking are renewable. You don't have to actually give away that victim. That victim's going to have sex with multiple buyers a night, and it's automatically renewable. Unlike guns or drugs. Once that criminal activity is done, you've lost it. You need to go get more drugs or get more guns to sell on the market. Traffickers have networks across the US and they're working together. And traffickers oftentimes can have those products being those victims, which are humans. Let's remember, these are humans that they're selling for money. A trafficker can have a victim, for instance, in Atlanta on Monday. And then on Tuesday, they might be in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And on Wednesday, they might be right here in Birmingham, Alabama. So that's important to understand, to see how these key partners kind of work together and operate in these trafficking networks. Business development, traffickers often recruit online through social media and in person. They might do this by using what's called a bottom. A bottom would be essentially a previously or a currently trafficked victim that then elicits other girls, whether through school or communities or just through their church or other activities, to become part of that trafficking stable or to come join me. You've seen me with this nice purse at school. I know how you can make quick money. It's just in an interview for a modeling gig, and it all starts out just so innocent. And then it turns into something that's really your worst nightmare.
First, I know y'all are just looking at my face right now, a little awkward. We're having some technical difficulties. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off my camera, but you're still going to be able to hear me. That way we can focus on the slideshow. If I need to, I'll turn it back on. I'm not going anywhere. So don't worry, I'm still here. Let's talk about buyer value proposition. Basically, what are the buyers getting? They're buying a fantasy. They are not thinking about human trafficking when they are going to buy sex. They are thinking about the fantasy of, this girl is interested in me, she finds me attractive. And the victims, well, what they're getting is just shelter, food, basic survival. What's interesting, let's talk about the customers. 35, our customers, the average frequent buyers between the ages of 35 and 44. They typically make over $100,000 annually. A third of them are married and over half of them have children under the age of 18. What's crazy is it's a low risk crime for the buyers because only 6% of them ever even get arrested for doing it. So very low cost to engage in the kind of behavior. They get in costs. I mean, recruitment, insurance, marketing, travel. I mean, there's no cost to this kind of crime really, other than the occasional hotel room.
And let's talk about revenue. These victims are actually having to see between as 10, 12, 15 buyers a day. They're actually having to be forced to have sex, that's rape, with these buyers in one day. That money then goes to their trafficker. If that's the case, that victim will have to make what they call a stack of money that she has to bring home to that trafficker, or that gorilla pimp is going to become violent and beat her. And if you think about that, most traffickers like to have an array of opportunities because these Johns, which are sex buyers, are buying a fantasy. And so a trafficker would like to have what's called a stable. It's unfortunately a very dehumanizing term, but a stable would be referred to as the trafficker's victims that he's selling for commercial sex. And in that stable, he might have different arrays of women. So he might have something to make sure that every fantasy is met for those Johns. And each different girl could make him between $250,000 and $275,000 per victim per year. That's tax-free money. Traffickers aren't paying taxes on this. They're not buying insurance for their victims. They don't really have to pay travel costs because they're doing it through our highway systems. That's a huge amount of revenue, and revenue can be an addictive drug. That's why human trafficking is such a prevalent issue, because their products are renewable. It's a low-risk crime for Johns to actually buy commercial sex. They're buying a fantasy that's fulfilled, and the traffickers are making a ton of money. But this is not a victimless crime.
Let's go to some national statistics, which I think, yeah. So it says 15 years old is the average age of entry into the sex trade on our slide. That's been updated. We really think that's now closer to 17, still a juvenile, but we want to make sure that our statistics are right. A lot of people think that human trafficking, like Liam Neeson taken, is some international crime. That's not the truth. 80 to 90% of our victims are US citizens, and they get trafficked in their own community. So while it certainly happens internationally, it is more of a local crime, which is a common misconception about trafficking. What's really crazy right now is that back in 2017, we had Backpage. Backpage was a website where you could buy and sell sex. It wasn't hidden, it was out in the open. And so it was very easy for the government and nonprofits to track these statistics. Many of our statistics come from 2017 because at the end of that year, that's when Backpage was shut down. And it's very similar to when you step on a spider and 1,000 other spiders crawl out. Now there's a million different websites where you can buy and sell sex. I mean, at any given time, there's over 25 different active sites here in Birmingham alone. So that's why a lot of our numbers are going to be from 2017. So if we apologize if they're a little outdated. It's just really hard to track human trafficking. One, it's vastly underreported. But what we do know is about 25% of our victims report seeing an average number of 10 buyers per day when they were in the trafficking life. And if you think about that, that's how they get the revenue estimates. 10 per day at a rate of 150 for 30 minutes to an hour. I mean, in Birmingham, it is a $110 million industry annually. That's crazy. And if you think about nationally, there is 100,000 to 300,000 children at risk each year. What's even scarier is that the United States is the #1 consumer of sex worldwide. Now, let's talk about training for law enforcement. Nationally, only about 15% of our law enforcement have been trained. That's so scary. The good news, at least in Birmingham, is that that's not the case here. A lot of our local officials and law enforcement have taken a pledge, and they have trained and are actively training every law enforcement officer. So yay for Birmingham. Again, I talked about this earlier, but 80 to 90% of our victims are women and children. That's why we refer to them as girls, she. And we talked about stats, why they're so hard. That's because less than 1% of victims ever report being victims of human trafficking. So the numbers we do have are still wildly low compared to what's actually happening.
Remember what we said, 85% of trafficking victims would tell you that they have a good relationship with their trafficker. So no wonder that there's less than 1% of victims that are ever reporting or acknowledging that they're a victim of human trafficking. They might just think that they're in an abusive relationship with their Romeo pimp.
Let's talk about Birmingham specifically, though.
Let's go there, Ellie. We're going to show you a map. This map obviously is where we live in Birmingham. And so if you are outside of Birmingham, welcome, we're happy to have you. But if you look at this map, you see how centrally located Birmingham is. With 2059 and Highway 65, you can essentially get anywhere in the entire nation through Birmingham's highway systems. Remember how we told you traffickers operate in hidden networks? We circled for you a couple of locations around Birmingham where a trafficker might take his victim and then disorient her and take her to another location, all within the same week, while she's had no sleep and had to have sex with 10 men a day for multiple days. In order to do that, she has to do a lot of things. She might have to take drugs. She might have to submit herself or force her friends to do so. The statistics for Birmingham in 2017, as Ellie said, are dated to 2017 because Backpage was such an easy compilation of this crime. That said, Homeland Security does estimate the commercial sex industry in Birmingham metro area is a $110 million industry a year. That obviously does not include illicit massage parlors, and child sex trafficking is much harder to quantify. Department of Homeland Security would tell you that since Backpage was shut down, that 20 to 25 different sites are operating in Birmingham at any given time. And in fact, one of those sites or multiple of those sites would have up to 250 ads updated hourly. Traffickers are smarter than us and have operated in these systems and use our highway systems to traffic victims. And it's a common form, it's a current form of human slavery. Beams is an acronym that stands for, it's out of University of Alabama, and it stands for Bringing Exploitation of Alabama Minors to a Stop. And they helped ascertain some data about trafficking victims throughout our state. And they estimate that in 2017, they identified over 1,000 victims that were trafficked through our state in that year. And of that, 55% were children, meaning individuals under the age of 19. From this map, you can also see Jackson, Mississippi, New Orleans, Chattanooga, Nashville. In Alabama, our victims often come from Mississippi, Tennessee, Florida, or Georgia, but they come from all over the nation, and oftentimes they also come from foreign countries. Georgia is actually number 4 for trafficking, Florida is number 3, and Mississippi is number 2. So you can see why trafficking is happening all the time and through our highway systems right under our noses. Okay, now that we've covered what trafficking happens and where it is occurring and what is happening, let's cover the cycle. Ellie?
So, yeah, thanks. We talked about the types of trafficking, Romeo, familial. This is kind of the cycle of how it begins and how they get into the life of trafficking. For victims, the beginning is the assessment and the recruitment. Traffickers prey on the vulnerabilities of victims, especially with the prevalence of social media. Let's say a young girl posts on her Facebook page, I just got in a fight with my mom, I hate her. A trafficker is on Facebook and sees that, messages her, I hate my mom too. And suddenly they're bonding over this and he sees a wedge of vulnerability he can exploit. Vulnerabilities can be food insecurity, housing insecurity, unstable home life. It really could be anything. Once they identify that, they're going to exploit it. That's when they come to the recruitment. And we get to grooming. Grooming is going to be the honeymoon phase of trafficking. When you have your Romeo pimps, they're talking about we're in a relationship, we're in love, me and you against the world. This is going to be the part right before it gets bad, because then we get to breaking. In the breaking, this is when they're really introduced to trafficking. Breaking can occur in a number of different ways. It can be something subtle like, if you don't do this, I'm going to send this nude photo to your parents. It can just be the nude photo itself. It's that line that the girl crosses that she didn't think she'd cross. Once that happens, there is more leverage, it's a larger wedge. It can be having sex with one of their friends just that one time for money. Once that line is crossed, It can be a gang rape. It can be, I mean, there's a whole different variety of ways that a victim can be broken in, so to speak. But once that happens, they are in the life of trafficking and they go to maintenance. We talked about how victims have to see a certain number of Johns a night, right? In order to maintain that kind of lifestyle of crazy hours, seeing different Johns, they need something to help them get through it, to disassociate from their bodies and to sustain. This is when we're going to get drugs normally, your meth, your heroin, anything that helps them survive. Once we get through maintenance, now we're in automatic. This is when the girl is in the life of trafficking. She has assumed this is what she is supposed to do. And she has just accepted that this is her fate in life.
Unfortunately, the goal in trafficking for that trafficker, and when he's breaking the victim, is shame and control. And once he breaks that victim, he has control. And then the victim enters the automatic phase, and it's just a matter of maintaining because they just can't see their way out of that life. Okay, we're going to do a quick exercise. So bear with us while we try to do this virtually. And I'm going to trust everyone to follow the directions and not cheat. Okay, right now I'm going to show you a white screen. In the next screen, I'm going to show you a series of pictures. And I'm going to give you 30 seconds, no pens. You can't write anything down. 30 seconds, phones down. Kids, if you're watching with your parents, make sure they're following the rules. In this game, I'm going to then flip back to a white screen. Okay, we ready to play? Phones down, no pens. Ellie, do you think they have no pens?
We'll find out.
Okay. Ready? Let me get the timer ready.
Go.
Go. Time's up. Stop. Back to our white screen. Okay, everyone, as quickly as you can, now you can write down everything you saw. We're going to give you a little bit of time to do so. Okay, hopefully everyone's had time to write down what they saw. Karen, can you flip back to the previous screen? How many images did you get? There were 14. How did you memorize what those images were? How did you know what to look for?
Yep, put your responses in the chat box. How many did you get right? What did you see that stood out? What helped you remember that? What was memorable to you?
Did anyone get all 14? Ellie and I have actually presented this before to actually a private investigation association, and shockingly, most of those members got somewhere near 13 to 14. However, when we presented it to the community, they get anywhere between 5 and 6. That can tell you the difference of a random moment of time and what you might think to be a group of unassociated images. That's what we're hoping you'll learn in this training. You'll learn how to connect things that don't seem to be related to connect the dots to try to help bring awareness and help victims survive. Not all connections are apparent, but trafficking is also hidden in plain sight. And we hope this training will help you recognize those signs and factors. I can't see the chat box, but I hope you got as much as possible. And I hope you keep chatting and telling us how many you got.
So we talked about the importance of knowing the signs. Let's then talk about the signs, right? So some community indicators. One, a victim may not be able to tell you where they are or where they just came from. We talked about that network and travel being such a big part of human trafficking. Think about it this way. If you're being moved from hotel to hotel every night, you're staying up late hours, you're taking drugs, you're not from the area, it'd be very difficult to describe your location to some random stranger. That's something to note that might be a sign of human trafficking. Also keep an eye out for multiple computers, multiple cell phones, unexplained wads of cash, condoms, sex toys. I mean, that makes sense. Listen for certain language, for certain words, the life, the game, a bottom bitch. I don't know if we've touched on what a bottom is, but a bottom in a trafficking situation is going to be a girl who is a victim of trafficking that has become the most trusted in the stable for the trafficker. Often she is the one who receives the beatings when things are not done right. And she's also the enforcer because the trafficker can't afford to beat every victim. then it would ruin the fantasy for the John. The bottom will often take the beating, but she's also there to enforce the rules if the trafficker can't be there. So that's why you might hear the word bottom bitch. A John is, we talked about that as a buyer. A trick is to turn a trick, means to have sex with the John. So number of tricks could be the number of times they have to have sex in a night. And then the word daddy. Trafficking has a lot of familial language. So daddy, wifey, sister, wife, sister. So keep an ear out for language like daddy when it's clear that that's not the girl's dad. Something else to note, a sudden change in behavior and appearance, starts dressing scantily and wears a lot of makeup, high heels. I mean, that by itself is not an indicator of trafficking. You have to take these all together. There's some more indicators. The next one is going to be brands and tattoos. So with brands and tattoos, common ones are crowns, a rose, someone's name. Traffickers do this to mark their property because, again, the victims are deemed property in this situation. They're going to be in places that are easily seen. So a chest, a neck, a wrist, even on fingers sometimes. And keep an eye out for those tattoos. They should be visible to you because they're supposed to be visible to other traffickers. Keep an eye out for a girl that's dressed inappropriately for the weather. It's freezing outside, maybe it's raining, and they're in high heels and a mini skirt walking down First Avenue North. Okay, that's suspicious. A minor at a hotel during school hours. Again, this by itself maybe is not a sign of trafficking. Maybe they're on a school field trip or they're going to a soccer game and they're with a group of kids. Okay, maybe they're not being trafficked. But when you start adding all of these signs together, it's 1 o'clock, it's a Wednesday, they have noticeable tattoos, they're dressed inappropriately. You kind of build your signs of trafficking by looking at all of them together. Another final one is someone who's being demeaned or controlled. They won't make eye contact. That's because they don't want to be seen as choosing up. That term is when a victim wants to choose a different trafficker. The way she does it is she makes eye contact with that trafficker to signal that she's interested in choosing a different stable. So when they're in public and they're around the traffickers, the victims will be looking down, especially when it comes to another male. They do not want to be seen making eye contact because it can mean big trouble for them later. You know, after all these signs, you may be wondering, like, why don't people just leave trafficking? Why don't they just decide to go home?
Yeah, in Ellie's slide, she covered a lot about stable and brand and trick. And all of those terms dehumanize the fact that we're talking about somebody being sold for sex, for profit, for another person. That's human slavery. And that's dehumanizing to those victims. Why doesn't she leave, you might wonder? Well, there's a lot of reasons why. The first one is her trafficker is going to isolate her and breaking her ties with her support system. Remember how we talked about that cycle? And that cycle starts with grooming and then automatically becomes breaking, and then it goes into maintenance and it becomes automatic for the victim. Well, similar to that, he's isolating her so that she can't reach out to other people. She can't call her family. She can't go back to her shelter. He's taken all her money, so she's dependent on him. She probably doesn't have a driver's license. She might be worried that if she leaves, he's going to report her for committing a crime, because prostitution is a crime. But what minors probably don't realize is that it's not a crime for a minor to consent to commercial sex, because a minor can't consent to commercial sex. He also might move her from city to city. We talked about that with the networks. If you're not getting any sleep and you've had to take drugs in order to have sex with 10 people in one night, you might not be able to run away because you don't know where you are. And you're so sleep deprived and you're so dependent on drugs and your trafficker, you can't run away from him. Other reasons she might not leave is she might be afraid to leave him because he's made threats to her. Remember that Romeo pimp who turns into the gorilla pimp? The trafficker might not want to leave because she'll be so beaten if she's found. He might tell her that she won't get any money if she leaves. She might not have any skills. She might not have any experience. And he's certainly not letting her keep her profits from the activity. Might convince her he'll find her if she runs, or threaten her or her family, or use that coercion and publish photos of her or videos of her and anything he has to guilt and shame her to stay. In addition, he might make her doubt her capability and sanity. Gaslighting is a term that makes you, as a victim or as a person who's been gaslighted, unaware that what's going on in your head and what's actually happening in reality is actually real. So you start to question your own brain. You start to question whether that happened. It's really, 2020, I didn't even know what day it was in the month of December. So you can imagine if you're being sleep deprived and you're abused and you're taken from your home, you probably don't really trust yourself. And so if you don't trust yourself, you can't make a plan to get out. You're sleep deprived, you're dependent, you don't have any money, and you don't have a driver's license. And you also are insecure because you've been having sex with people for money who are beating you and abusing you. And it's a horrific, horrific cycle. In addition, that trafficker might convince her that he deserves another chance. So she believes in him. He's her boyfriend. She wants him to do better. She wants him to change his ways. And he just promised that he would right after she was beaten or right after she didn't make her staff for the night, and she is beaten by either the bottom or her trafficker. Then after that, he might blame the abuse that he committed to her on stress. Baby, it just happened that one time. I only needed you to have sex with our landlord. I'm so sorry. I promise I'll do better. We all want to believe in the person that we love. And if you're a victim, you're going to believe in your trafficker because you don't really have another option. He might promise her to go to counseling, but never following through. There's so many reasons why a victim might not leave. We hope you're aware of them. We're going to get to what I think people would say is their favorite slide of our presentation. We're going to spend a bit of time on this, but I'm going to throw it back to Ellie to kind of introduce the beginning.
So with the prevalence of social media, we're seeing these sex ads online, right? And they can't just say, hey, I'm a trafficker and I'm selling a young girl, right? They can't just come out and use that language. So they're using terms, acronyms, things to signal to buyers what they're selling, right? So if you look at the upper corner, we've got young, fresh, and new. This is language that indicates someone is usually underage. You're going to see a rose and a money bag. Roses are actually symbols of the sex trade. And money bags and the roses are used similarly in social media posts or posts on websites. So 5 money bags could be $500. 5 roses could be $500. So they're kind of a currency symbol. Then you see folks and family. And we talked about how trafficking is very familial in the language. They may call someone their family, their cousin, their sister wife, daddy, that's on there. And that's even though they're not family. But it's because they want them to feel like it's us against the world, like they are a family, they've created a family. That goes to part of the isolation. Then you'll see MOB or MOE, that stands for money over bitches or money over everything. Both a trafficker and a victim could have this on their profile. That just indicates that they're in the life. Then you'll see the lock and the key. This symbolizes loyalty, that a girl has a trafficker and she's loyal to that trafficker. Usually we see that with the trafficker's name and then that symbol. That way it signals to every other trafficker that this girl is taken. Now the opposite of that is going to be that word renegade. A renegade is a victim who does not have a trafficker, but she's still a trafficking victim. And you may wonder, like, when does that ever happen? Well, let's say the trafficker gets locked up for a night or two. Suddenly that girl is a renegade. She's still a victim of trafficking. She still needs those basic needs: housing, food, shelter, drugs even. So she's still in the life, but she's a renegade. So that's when another trafficker can come in. And then you'll see the AA with the red symbol over it, the X out. We actually see a lot of racism in human sex trafficking. So that symbol is used to say no African American buyers. Jessie, you want to take the rest?
Yeah. So I'm going to start over in the bottom right with the white bunny. That white snow bunny actually represents a young white girl. So for that John or that buyer that's looking online, that ad might mean that she's young, she's white, or she's fresh or new. Next to that, Ellie already covered this, but it would not be uncommon for a victim to call her trafficker daddy. 100 is also similar to the rose, which is the oldest symbol of prostitution, but the 100, if you see that multiple times in a social media ad or an internet post, that might mean this sex act costs however many times that symbol is depicted. So if there's 3 roses, it might be $300. If there's 3 $100 symbols, it might be $100. Stack is the amount of money that the victim has to make the trafficker each night. It also is sometimes referred to as the trap. And another way to signify that is the money sign with dollars and wings. If you see that multiple times, it could also mean I need to make $1,000 a night if that's shown 10 times, if the depiction is $100 per symbol. In addition, this is something that as I got involved in human trafficking and saw this slide, I had to say, is this really happening? Like, is this really online? And the truth of the matter is, it is. If you were to look on Instagram and to Google some of these hashtags or codes, you would come up with people and victims and even traffickers that are publishing these ads and so proud of this life. And some of those acronyms or symbols you might see is HGO or PGO. And HGO stands for hoeing going on, or PGO stands for pimping going on. You might also see that with an R in front of it. So that would mean real hoeing going on or real pimping going on. In addition, remember the pagers? Well, the pagers, the number 304 actually spells the word hoe when you flip a pager upside down. So trafficking has changed with time. These social media codes evolve, but 304 doesn't have to evolve because it's a hidden code that nobody really uses a pager anymore. So 304 could symbol a hoe or a trafficking victim. P is for pimp. P is actually the 16th letter in the alphabet. So that's why 16 might be something you see on that. B, capital B, would stand for bottom, which would be that victim that has kind of been recruited to a manager and is helping that trafficker elicit or really recruit other members. Then the crown is going to be the king and queen. There is a lot of monarchy language as well as familial language. And then the peace emoji is actually also reflective of pimp. The last thing, that bottom right logo with the yellow, it's actually a Snapchat filter with a dog. And when you open your mouth, the tongue comes out. I'm sure we've all seen it and thought it's completely innocent. And while it is, in some trafficking situations, that's something that a trafficking victim might post so she could disguise her face. Okay. In addition to those kind of trafficking lingos or secret social media codes, there's so many social media apps and internet websites that traffickers use to either recruit victims or to publish commercial sex. We're showing you a slide of multiple applications that show you internet communications. We're not saying these applications are supporting or promoting commercial sex. We are saying and helping you be aware, if you're seeing these applications and you're part of it, these are ways in which traffickers can recruit victims, but also traffickers can publish commercial sex for sale. If you want to know more about trafficking and social media online, come to our Junior League BARC event on January 19th. It's virtual from noon to 1 p.m. We'll teach you more about parental controls on your child's social media and what to be aware of online so that you help protect your child in presence. But what you need to know is essentially if there's an online chat feature or an ability to communicate with an unknown member online, that's a manner in which your child could be recruited for trafficking, but also a manner in which sex could be published for sale. Okay. And I'll say just out loud some of these. There's Instagram, there's Facebook, there's Plenty of Fish, Skip the Games, Meetup, Musical.ly, Seeking Arrangement. Remember Ashley Madison? All of those things are online. And now that Backpage has been shut down, it's much more fractured. I will point your attention to the one.
I was about to say, Jessie, can you explain the calculator is
always
used?
Talk about the calculator. So as a divorce lawyer, I've unfortunately seen the calculator a lot of times, but look at that calculator on the bottom right of your screen. That looks like the standard calculator that's on every single iPhone we get, right? Turns out it's not. That's called the Vault. It's a secret app that behind that calculator screen is actually explicit or photos or videos of whatever the user wants to hide. So that's not really a calculator. Now, Ellie, I bet everyone after this is going to go look at their kid's phone and wonder if they have two calculator apps, don't you?
I mean, they probably should.
It wouldn't be a bad thing.
So I'm sure y'all are feeling a little overwhelmed. That's okay. We have a video that I think does a good job of putting everything we talked about in a summation. So keep in mind everything we've said, all the signs, and try and look for those signs when we watch this video.
It's a great video, so pay attention.
Can anyone tell me what the different chromosome is for a male versus a female? Yes.
XX is female and XY is male.
Correct?
Mrs. Douglas up here.
No, it's down.
It's right here. That's important. We're trying to study.
What is this?
Nothing.
What is this? What are you
Nothing.
doing?
It's nothing.
Who is that?
Nobody.
Who is that? Who are you texting?
Nobody.
So you didn't tell your parents that you were coming over here tonight, right? Chill with us.
Get off me! What the hell is your problem?
Who the hell do you think you are? Huh?
Hey. It's gonna be fun. Come over here.
Okay, let's talk about all the stuff that was in that video. We saw a change of appearance. We saw tattoos. We saw the sending of nude photos, which again can be used to blackmail the victim. Tattoos, drug usage, the breaking process where it transitioned from a relationship into trafficking.
Ellie, I think we also saw a Romeo pimp.
We did, yeah. And then he turned into a gorilla.
Yeah. And did you hear him say, you didn't tell your parents you were coming here tonight, did you?
Yeah, it's part of the isolation that we talked about. I think that video does a good job of showing how someone who you wouldn't normally expect to be a trafficking victim per se can easily get drawn into that life and become a victim.
Probably why the teacher was so shocked to see her, because she appeared to be a really good student and she was studying with her girlfriends around the time she met this guy who she probably just thought was her boyfriend.
That's the thing, trafficking can happen really anywhere. This isn't just one community. It's not just one area. It happens in every community. Granted, a lot of our victims come from the foster care system. A lot of them are already coming from broken homes. When you see a runaway, within 48 hours, they can be in life of trafficking. So it's something.
Did you hear that? That's shocking.
Yeah.
What Ellie said about runaways, within the child running away from a home or DHR or foster home or whatever location, there is a higher risk that they will become trafficked within 48 hours of leaving their home. Remember we said about survival sex? This isn't a choice somebody actively wakes up and makes. This is a choice because they're forced to do it. They were guilted, they have shame. They don't want their mom to find out about that photo they sent to somebody who they thought was their boyfriend. That's why it's hard for them to get out. Remember what Ellie told us about Johns and the average sex buyer? The people that are buying this are buying a fantasy. They're buying something that's not existing. So what do you do if you suspect trafficking? What do you do if you're now, after this training, able to connect those dots, or you see something so suspicious? Please, under no circumstances, we do not want you to confront or try to rescue the victim. This could jeopardize their safety, but also your own. However, we want you to try to remember as many details as possible about the potential victim and the situation. The best details to remember are going to be descriptive characteristics like a license plate number, the location you're at, and the physical features of the trafficker or the victim. If you see something, say something. Don't be afraid to report it. Here we've listed the Department of Homeland Security's Blue campaign. And that's the phone number on your screen, 1-866-347-2423. But you don't have to call the number. You can even text HELP to be free, which is 233-733. Okay, so now that you've learned the signs, we want you to be more aware of your surroundings. We want you to talk about it with your kids at home. And if you started this conversation tonight, we're not done yet. This is January's Human Trafficking Awareness Month. We hope after this you're more aware, but that you'll also come to our BARC event on January 19th or to our Truckers Against Trafficking event on January 26th. We have lots of events. I know when you registered for this, you're going to get notices for all those. We hope you come. We hope you attend. We really appreciate the donations. All of you that donated, we want you to know that your money is going to go to human trafficking education and help bring awareness efforts to this. Ellie, it's time for your videos back.
Oh, okay, I'll join.
Join us again.
So you didn't go anywhere.
Right
All right.
there.
Do y'all have any questions for us? Put them in the chat box and let us know. I know we just gave you all a lot of information, especially this is your first time learning about actual human trafficking, not like Liam Neeson taken. So feel free to ask us anything. We're here to answer any questions you may have.
Ellie, we've got a question.
Oh, good.
Somebody asked us, do victims search online for certain things? That's a good one. I don't know that we have any research as far as what victims search online for. We do know that victims have gone to doctors, they've gone to the hospital, they've gone to see certain police officers and have not necessarily been investigated or been identified as a victim. We do know there's plenty of victims that don't identify themselves as a victim of human trafficking.
And I would say it's not that victims are seeking out the life. They're not looking up certain things that lead them into this. It's not something that they're actively searching for. Victims of human trafficking are recruited. The trafficker reaches out to them. They are posting something on social media. They have an Instagram account. They can even be trafficked in the schools. A lot of our bottoms, remember that's the girl that does the recruitment, will go into our high schools and show up with some new shoes, a new purse, and then the girl or the friend will ask, hey, where did you get that? How can you afford that? And she'll say, let me introduce you to my friend. So it's not that the victims are searching out anything in particular online. It's that traffickers are searching out them. Okay, we've got another question.
Yeah, actually one that I'm seeing on the screen. So in your opinion, what could be improved in our legislation to decrease trafficking? Do we have a long time? Are we ready to engage?
Well, I will say Alabama has some really good trafficking laws. They're new. That's the problem, is we don't have a lot of history with them. They were recently passed, and so I think they're going to make a big difference in the
Ellie,
future.
let's also talk about this. Ellie has great experience with this as a DA, but can you publish a photo of a John or a person who's buying sex?
No, we are not allowed to publish photos of Johns.
So why is it often that we see all these news articles that say prostitution sting, but have photos of the victims, but not the Johns?
It's a good question. I can't answer it.
Our law doesn't allow us to post photos of the Johns. And if I were a wife, my husband were doing that, remember we said majority of them are married and have children under the age of 18 in their home. I'd want my husband's photo posted, not the victim.
I will say Tuscaloosa is doing something really good with Johns. They have a Johns school. I'm not sure how much of the research is in yet about recidivism, but just through anecdotes, it's looking like it's very effective as far as ruining the fantasy of buying sex. Once the men actually know what they're doing, they're not going back to it.
Yeah, let's talk about John's School. What's the deterrent on John's School? So when John's arrested by the West Alabama Task Force, which is Tuscaloosa, they have to go to John's School on a Saturday. So if you're trying to hide this from your family or your children, you're spending an entire Saturday at John's School, and you also have to pay a fee to get your vehicle out of impound. So you can't really hide that sex act by going to get cash at the ATM and buying sex and hiding it. You now have to tell your wife or your family what you're doing on a Saturday. You might have to tell your employer. You also have to pay money to get your vehicle back. So that is a huge deterrent and a great law enforcement action to prevent the demand for sex buying.
I will say we have some really great laws in Alabama for human trafficking. We've got really good representation that want trafficking ended. Our law enforcement, they're doing a great job. Homeland Security, FBI, CIA, they're all doing a great job in this field. What we need mostly is community awareness. People don't know what trafficking actually is. 90% of what we call prostitution is actually human trafficking. So I think the biggest issue we have right now is the community doesn't know what they're looking at when they see it. And once you learn about human trafficking and you start seeing the signs, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
And the community, they're going to be our jurors. They're going to be the people that serve on these cases, that make these decisions and bring down verdicts. So we need the community to know what human trafficking looks like.
And I think that's a hard thing because I think so many times we just try to stay in our own lane and not get involved in other things. And it's funny because when we're online and on Facebook and on social media, we're willing to get involved in everything. We're asking you to kind of change that and try to get involved on things that you see that don't look right. There's not really a consequence if you're wrong.
Not physically involved.
Not physically involved. Please don't rescue anyone.
Don't grab any girls.
No, don't grab any girls. And what Ellie said, we do have a lot of great laws in the state. We have lots of great nonprofit organizations and charities that help victims and help with that rescue effort. Ellie, we have a question. In what stage of the cycle is most likely to see a victim rescued? That's kind of a hard question because if you think about it, they're not really in the cycle until they get to that automatic phase and it's maintenance. So I think that stage of the cycle it's less of the stage of the cycle to see a victim rescued than it is just being, I don't know, I guess it's being tired of the situation. Or
Think about it like domestic violence. It's the same kind of power coercion struggle of love, hate, violence. So we don't identify victims of domestic violence until violence has happened. We don't identify victims of human trafficking until they're trafficked. So we're really not rescuing them until they're already in automatic phase. And
I
even
kinda
then
think
they
they're
go back.
Yeah, they're volunteering to be rescued too.
Well, they go back to their traffickers on average at least 7 times before they actually leave the life. So we can't even identify them until they're automatic, which is horrible. But that's why we need community awareness, so we can identify them before they even get into the life. So parents can say, this doesn't seem right. This relationship is weird. Why are you acting this way? What's going on? If we're aware of it, we can stop it before it even gets there. As far as a law enforcement standpoint, we're not going to know about it until it's already fully blown human trafficking.
Yeah, and let's talk about that a little bit. So we have a question that do organizations try to confidentially intersect with victims online? We can't speak for any other organizations. We can only speak for the Junior League of Birmingham, and we're not actively involved in engaging with victims, but we are involved in human trafficking awareness training. We do, and you might have seen them. We've posted signs. I'm going to try this on a video, so bear with me. You might have seen these red signs in the airport or in other transportation hubs around town. The Junior League of Birmingham has actually secured those signs and put them in the airport and other trafficking or transportation hubs and locations in order to help bring awareness. It allows the victim, if they do want to get out of the life or they do want to be rescued, to have an opportunity to identify as a victim and seek resources and help.
I will say, yes, there are organizations that are rescuing victims from ads they're posting online. Rescuing is a tough term because, again, a lot of times they go back, but there are good organizations in the Birmingham area, and Birmingham is the only area I really know about. I know Trafficking Hope is a good organization that goes in, that will do stings and do operations and try and identify victims. Now, they're not physically grabbing them off the streets and throwing them in a van and driving them away, but they're reaching out and giving resources. They're making connections. They're providing resources and help. So there are a lot of good organizations. Another one I have to mention is the Well House. They're really kind of the leader as far as housing victims. They give short-term, long-term care, treatment, a job, and they provide services to victims all over the country. It's not just Alabama. So we do have other good organizations that are in trafficking, that are doing good work, including identifying victims online and trying to provide resources to them if they want it.
Yeah, so we have a question. I saw you're doing an event with Truckers Against Trafficking. Are those one of the transportation organizations who are helping fight trafficking? Absolutely. Truckers Against Trafficking is a national organization that is actively involved in eliminating human trafficking. So that's going to be a great event that we have coming up. We absolutely support Truckers Against Trafficking, and we think that truckers are a really great resource to help identify this because they're on the road a ton. And that's unfortunately where trafficking occurs, through our highway systems and in our communities. Do you have any more questions? All right, in your opinion, what could be improved in our legislation to decrease trafficking? I think we covered this. I would say at this point, we would probably suggest, although we have great laws and we did just pass the Safe Harbor Act in 2016, we would probably suggest going after the demand and not necessarily prosecuting the supply.
And I'd be curious to see what happens with the laws we just passed. Again, we have brand new laws. They're progressive as far as human trafficking goes, but we can't prosecute someone on the new law with what happened before. So
Yeah,
we
that's a
haven't had
common misnomer. We have that come up
Yeah.
a lot in our trainings.
we haven't
Ellie.
had a chance for these laws to kind of really take into effect and see how they're going to affect actual cases. So I'm cautious to say what can be better because I just want to wait and see what it looks like now.
That's the thing. We talk really fast and this presentation was fast, but to understand that if a crime was committed in 2016, it might get to prosecution in 2019 or 2020. And what Ellie's talking about is because our laws have changed so much and improved so much in the last 4 to 5 years, we're not necessarily seeing the rewards of that yet in the legal system just because it moves so slow. And then add COVID to the situation, there's a lot of delay and backlog.
Okay, we see another question. What is the larger percentage of traffickers, familial or Romeo, and are there stats? I don't want to quote a wrong stat. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head. I can just speak from what I've seen and what I've heard. I would say in Alabama, we're looking at about 50-50. And again, remember that traffickers can transition from one to another. It can start as a Romeo, it can go to a gorilla, it can come back to a Romeo. Romeo is what we're going to see mostly online. The reaching out through Facebook, the relationship, and then familial is going to be family, but we do see a lot of both.
And I think we saw that trafficker in our last video transfer from a Romeo pimp to a gorilla pimp. And that's kind of a quick jump, but it's not an infrequent jump for traffickers. Okay, how would you know the difference between regular prostitution and trafficking, working in the hospitality industry? We're so glad you're here from the hospitality industry. We do offer this training for hotels, so let us know if you'd like to have that training featured at your hotel. How would you know the difference between regular prostitution and trafficking? Well, if it's a minor under 19, it can't be prostitution, it's trafficking.
Yeah, and I would say the way I describe it is whenever there is another party involved, right? Prostitution is if I go out on my own, I sell my body, I keep the money. That is prostitution. No one is forcing me. I'm doing it fully of my own free will, knowing what I'm doing. Once there is another person involved, we need to start thinking trafficking. And that's because any kind of undue influence, coercion, someone keeping money, providing transportation, that's when we need to be suspicious. So if you're in the hospitality industry, let's say you're working the front desk and you're seeing multiple girls come in together, red flag instantly. There's multiple prostitutes working together, not very common, right? Especially if they're doing it voluntarily. I will say there's a stat that says 90% of what we consider prostitution is actually trafficking. And that's because we're becoming more aware of what trafficking looks like. If you think there's prostitution, immediately you should be scared, but then you need to be thinking, is this really prostitution? And that makes sense because common sense tells us that women don't wake up one day and say, I can't wait to have sex for money. Are there people that do it voluntarily? Yes. But the reality is a lot of them either were trafficked and this is now the only thing they know how to do, or they were trafficked, had a drug problem, and now they have to sustain it through selling themselves. So trafficking is usually in there somewhere.
Well, that was a wonderful presentation. We don't have any more questions, so we'd like to wrap up and thank you for A, attending, and B, donating, and C, just willing to start the conversation to be aware. We hope you enjoyed our presentation and we hope you come to any more of our virtual trainings this month in January, because although we're at home, although we're virtual, we're still presenting awareness to you. Any final thoughts, Ellie?
No, I just want to say thank y'all for coming. I know you got to see my face a lot, so sorry, I think. Thanks for coming to the training. We have a lot of these. If you have questions that you didn't want to put in the chat, or if you think of something later, our names are up here. We're on social media. You can reach out to us or anyone in the committee if you feel more comfortable doing that. And we're happy to, if you have a group that you know would benefit from this training, let us know. We're happy to do it virtually, or when things open up, we're happy to do it in person. So call us, beep us if you want to reach us.
But don't page us because nobody has pager.
I don't have one. All right. Bye, guys. Thank you.
Bye.